We're speaking about entering into the covenant of Arevus, where every Jew is responsible for every other Jew. And we explained that based on one's sphere of influence, that is the level to which one is accountable, because if you could have made a difference and you didn't make the difference, there's a claim against you. So the greater the sphere of influence, the greater the claim, because you could have made a difference, positive or negative. Tabchem neshechem, your children, your women, v'gercha Hashem b'kerev machnecha, the convert, which is in the midst of your camp, michoti v'etzecho achoik me'echo, from the woodcutter to the water drawer. So Rashi cites the Chazal that just as you find Tam Yoshua, there was a Canaanite nation which had presented themselves as they came from a far off land, but they were really from the 7 nations that should have been annihilated, and Yoshua had designated them, because he had taken an oath that he would not do anything to them, as water carriers and woodcutters. Identically, in time of Moshe Rabbeinu, something similar happened. So Rashi explains in Yud, B'choti v'itzecho, Melamed Sheba, M'Kananim Lizgayer, B'mei Moshe, Shebo Kinvuonim B'mei Yeshua. They were Canaanites that came to convert as the Givonim, which were one of the people of Canaan. So Omer b'Givonim v'yasu gam hema b'orma. They also came with guile, with deception. So their sphere of influence, they're considered the equivalent of illegitimate Jews. Although they converted, they're not permitted to marry into the Jewish people. And what are all these people? What is it all about? Also, to enter into the covenant of Hashem and His oath. Asher Hashem Elokech Korisim Chayom. All this is to establish you today as a people, and He will be God. I mentioned yesterday that the Orach Chaim HaKosher explains that to guarantee and maintain that special level of observance, if Jews are responsible for one another, I mean everyone looks over everyone else's shoulder to make sure he's doing the right thing, you're guaranteed, or you're more assured that things will be done right. And as explained in the name of the Ramak, the whole concept of V'ahavta l'recha kamocha is that when one Jew does the wrong thing, the other Jew is affected negatively, because every one of us is part of the same network. Therefore, as a result of that, being responsible for the other person is being responsible for ourselves. So that guarantees, that will guarantee, it will establish you as a people, as He spoke to you, as He promised the Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It's not only with you alone am I entering in this covenant. Now this is the basis to say that all neshamos, all Jewish souls that were eventually going to be born, were at Sinai, and we're here during this bris. Those who are with us today, standing with us, Rashi, this bris, this covenant, is not only with the present generation, but it's with all the future generations. They're bound to this concept of arevus. They're all responsible for one another. Communal responsibility. You know, a father, when a child becomes bar mitzvah, father says, I'm now absolved from the punishment of this child. A child as a minor has no liability. But yet the father, when he becomes bar mitzvah, says a bracha, I'm absolved. Absolved from what? I mean, factually, if the child does anything wrong, there's no liability. So what do you mean? From now that he becomes an adult and he assumes his own level of responsibility, now he's on his own, I'm no longer accountable. And until now, you weren't accountable either, because the child himself, anything he did, he is considered incompetent, and therefore the sin is not considered a sin. So why does the father have to be absolved? Just a simple understanding. Now, if a child does not raise his child properly, there's a chiyuv, there's an obligation of a father to teach his son Torah. It's father's obligation on the child. Although the child himself has no obligation, the child has no obligation. The obligation is incumbent on the father to do whatever it takes to teach the child Torah, to interest him, to incentivize him, whatever it is. Although the child, as the recipient, is not obligated. But why is the Torah so insistent? That the father teaches the child, and as the Gemara says, we had recently in Sukkah, when a child begins speaking, the first verse you teach him is Torah Tziv Elonu Moshe, Moshe Kilas Yaakov, and the second verse you teach him is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The first words should be actually words of Torah, the fundamentals of Torah. Because if you don't inculcate the child as a child with the right values and the right understanding of whatever he's meant to be as an adult, and the child does the wrong thing, and you allow the child to do the wrong thing due to the lack of supervision of the parent, when he becomes an adult, he's going to do the wrong thing because he wasn't brought up right, properly. He wasn't taught properly. The father allowed him to do certain things. So his failing as an adult is due to his upbringing as a child. So it says, now I'm no longer obligated to supervise my child to make sure he's doing the right thing. Now it's no longer a father-child relationship. It's arevus, like any other Jew is responsible for that adult child. As a member of the Jewish people, the father is no different. But until he becomes an adult, the father himself is the one who's fully responsible for raising that child and teach him the values and to make sure he's conditioned, that the conditioning is positive, that when he becomes an adult, he does the right thing. So the bracha the father says is, Baruch Shep'Torani, I'm no longer liable for that punishment, meaning the raising aspect of it. To make sure he does the right thing as a father, that I'm absolved, I no longer have to do, because anything which he did fail as a parent, as the child was a child, and due to that the child violates, transgresses as an adult, that is attributed to the father. Because if you trace it to his childhood, that's exactly the reason why he violated and transgressed when he was an adult. Just want to go a little further. Atem Yadatim, because you know firsthand, as we lived in the land of Egypt, and we passed in the midst of the nations which you passed through. So Rashi himself says, you saw the nations who revolved in idolatry. And maybe one of you were somehow influenced that you should follow their ways, their idolatrous ways. As it says in a moment, therefore I have to adjure you with an oath. Now, what did we see? When we passed among the nations and when we were in Egypt, what did we see? Referring to the idolatry. You saw their rodents. You saw the dung. What do you mean you saw the rodents and you saw the dung? So Rashi says, Al Shem Shem Mu'usim Kishkotzim. The idolatry, all these idolatrous rituals and behavior patterns were as detestable as putrid rodents. Yuleim Shemusrach Musin Kagolo. It has a stench and as disgusting as dung. That's what the idolatry is. Eitzva Even. The idolatry made of wood, stone, risim, begolo, that you saw in the open. Because the non-Jew is not concerned, they may be stolen, has no value. But the idols that were made of silver and gold, that's together in their inner sanctums. They're concerned it may be stolen. And therefore, as a result of that, and because you were exposed to that, maybe one of you was drawn to it and you have an interest to go serve that idolatry. So my mashgiach, Zechrein V'rocha, always used to say, here Moshe Rabbeinu is depicting it as what? As shikusem yuleim. It's something that is as putrid as rodents, as disgusting as dung. That's what it is. And yet, because you were exposed to it, there's a concern, maybe one of you people have an interest in it. I mean, if it's as disgusting and has a stench, who would want to go near it? But yet, he has to forewarn them, but you never know, maybe one of you has some level of interest. I mean, how can you have an interest if that's what it is? And that's the way it's depicted, and that's evidently, if he's saying it what it is, the Jews themselves see it as that also. So how do we reconcile the two realities? So my mashgiach would say, in the 50s, in New York City, if you travel the subway system, the cars, if you would sit in the car, in the subway car, the seats were made of straw, and very often you would sit, you get actually pricked with the straw. It wasn't that comfortable. The sound was deafening. The cars, as they went, would jolt and rattle, that literally you could be thrown off the seat. That's how it rattled and jolted and moved, and the screeching was deafening. And people get on the train, within 3 minutes, you find people are sleeping. They're lulled into this gradual sleep and gets deeper and deeper as there's a rhythm. Once you get into that rhythm, you don't hear the screeching, you don't feel the prick of the seat, you don't fall off the seat when you're jolted because somehow you're in the rhythm. But initially when you get on, it's deafening. You're thrown, you have to hold on, otherwise you're going to be thrown to the floor. He says that's life. You can be exposed to something initially. You're taken aback. You see it as dung, the stench is intolerable. You're exposed a little bit, you begin acclimating yourself on a subliminal level. You don't even realize to what degree it's affecting you, and you're being eroded already. And that's exactly what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying. In reality, when you see it as that. But you never know, due to that level of exposure, somehow you could be affected. And if you are affected, you become acclimated and you no longer see it as it was originally. I'll give you an example. Person is a real yeshiva bacher. And when he studies the yeshivas in that environment, and certain values of the world are seen as unacceptable. Now he goes out into the world as an adult, which he has no choice because he has to go to work, and he's exposed to many things. The things that initially, which he saw as revolting and repulsive, he doesn't see it as repulsive, as revolting any longer. What happened? Because as a result of having to be out there and being exposed over time, somehow you're affected, you're influenced, and you acclimate. whether it's survival, whatever it is, doesn't make a difference. And you no longer, although conceptually you understand what it is and it's not you and what you want to be, but you're closer to it. You're more easily drawn to it, which before there wasn't even consideration what happened. And that's the reality of all of us. Therefore, Moshe has to forewarn them that even though factually you see it as shikuseim, as rodents, as dung, and it's something which is repulsive and disgusting and has a stench, you don't want to go near it. Tell you, when I was in Kolel, we wanted to learn, when we were studying Chulin, so we went down to a slaughterhouse and to see exactly how they do the internal examination of the animals. When you walk into a slaughterhouse, because of the animals are there, and there's all the manure and all the stench, you walk in there, it's like walking in, it's like you're almost like walking into a wall, an invisible wall. There's a smell which literally is intolerable. And we had to wear old clothing because we were told that once our clothing absorbs the smell of whatever the slaughterhouse is, even if you clean it, you wash your clothing, there will always be a trace of that smell. Within 5 minutes being there, we didn't smell the smell any longer. We walked in, it was like walking into a wall. That's how thick that smell was. We were repulsed by it. 5 minutes later, you smelled nothing. That's how quickly we acclimated to it. And that's exactly what life is. It doesn't take long to acclimate. And therefore, Moshe has to forewarn us that regardless of what you believe, what you are, unless you are cognizant and you're involved in the system, to always re-spiritualize and re-energize and be involved, ultimately you're going to be eroded and you're going to be influenced and be affected. Therefore, he has to adjure us with an oath to understand the seriousness of life and how vulnerable we are to influence. Mazel tov, Alan.